I was stationed on the Antietam aircraft carrier. Warner Brothers came aboard with a movie to film the movie Task Force, which starred Gary Cooper and Walter Brennan and various other Hollywood stars. And they came aboard in Alameda, California. And the executive officer was kind of well, I didn't have much to do with him, except I did have to report to him on occasion with the status of the the division I was in, operations. And so I knew him that way. And the movie people came aboard and were settled and everything. And whenever we tied up at a dock, the first thing we did was send over the telephone lines so we could communicate with anybody on the telephone. Well, Commander Rigsby, the executive officer, was the first one, or supposedly the first one, to use the telephone, the landline. And he was calling his wife in San Diego. We were in San Diego. And hear this feminine voice on the other side of the line turned out to be a sailor's wife. The sailor's wife had phoned in to talk with her husband, who had just come in on the ship, and nothing unusual about that except the timing. So he got pretty upset about it. In fact, he was, we didn't know it, but he was almost violent about it, that he'd be hooked up and there must be somebody to blame. So he called the officer in charge of interior communications, and I can't remember his name. He was a real nice guy. And he had gone ashore to spend the weekend with his wife's in-laws. And so he wasn't available. So he called his superior, which was Commander, oh God, I can't remember his name. And he said, I'll handle it, I'll get him back here, which he did. He called his wife's in-laws and told him to report back immediately. Commander Rigsby wants to Commander Rigsby was the executive officer who had just talked with a sailor's wife, and it miffed him a lot. So he came back to the ship and went in and was chewed out thoroughly by the executive officer for allowing such a thing as that to happen. Couldn't do anything about it. So that was on the fire. So then I was the operations duty officer that night, and so I was responsible, quote, quote. Nobody could be responsible for that, and I ought to do something about it anyway. So I went down and was ordered into the executive officer's office and to report, and I told him what had happened, and apparently that isn't enough. So he said, well, I want you to get a hold of Lieutenant so-and-so, who was the officer that had gone ashore. And so I called the number that he left, and it was his wife's in-laws, his wife's people, and he was there, and I talked with him, and I said, you better get back here. Rigsby wants to talk with you, period. And he said, I'll jump in my car and come back, and he was clear out on Point Loma. The ship was parked down at the Naval Air Station in San Diego. So he came back, and was entertained for a while in Rigby's office, and I can imagine what went on. So that didn't satisfy him. So, in the meantime, I'd talked with my boss, who is the operation officer. He says, I'll take care of it. He says, you don't need to worry any more about it. I'll get hold of that officer and I'll take care of it. So he did call that officer too. Well, so Rigsby called me and the executive officer and proceeded to chew me out about the whole incident. And I mean, Dr. Llewellyn, the medical officer, was in his office and he heard the whole thing. And Rigsby threatened to court-martial me, reduce me in rank to a seaman first class, and all such other threats. He says, I'll have your stripes and I'll have them in short order, you know. Well, it was a bad chewing out. And I got to the point while he was chewing me out that I had to watch the expression on my face because I could feel myself going into a disgust mode. and I didn't want him to see that expression on my face. So he finally got me chewed out good, ripped a new one, that's what we call a new rear end. And the medical officer sat there and listened through the whole thing. And So he finally dismissed me, and I left. During the time he was ripping me out, he said, and I bawled your boss out for this incident too, the telephone call. He said, I felt pretty good about that because he was a knothead anyway. He, nobody would play cribbage with him because he cheated. He was a commander. So I took what I got and left and got out of there. And within a couple of weeks or so, I was transferred. And never to be bothered by that guy again. And I was very new in my new position out on Guam when I was decoding a message that came in on the fleet broadcast, and it related that Commander E.O. Rigsby of the USS Antietam, executive officer on the USS Antietam, had apparently committed suicide in his stateroom on such and such a morning. It was just a day or so before. So he, over that incident, stepped into his shower that morning and blew his brains out. Now that was how wrapped up he was of stupid things. Now, about a couple of years later, or how many years, anyway, we were living at the base, at the Fleet Training Group at Alameda, where I had quarters after Marion had polio, and we'd come back from Guam. And I went over to do a bunch of laundry, and who should be in there but Dr. Llewellyn, who heard my chewing up. And he said, that was the worst experience of my life, to hear an officer unload like that on another officer. He says that man was crazy. And he said I had suggested, pled with him many a time to get rid of some of his responsibility. He just overloaded himself responsibility and couldn't handle it. And, and not only that, he'd gotten a girl somewhere pregnant, and he had a family of girls. I think he had 4 girls, young girls, and that with all his pressure, he couldn't take it. That was his only way out.
Wow.
And I broke that message. Did I cry about it? Hell no. He solved it the way a coward would do it. That kind of a guy that would take on all the responsibility and think that nobody could do anything but him. The guy that was in charge of the exterior communications, he couldn't have done anything. He was all right. He was a good officer, did a good job, but he just went on down the line, and the whole